Logan Carter walked through the towering halls of the Galactic Combat Academy, his footsteps echoing in the vast corridors. The Academy was a place where the best warriors of the universe trained, a melting pot of species from across the galaxy. Hulking warlords with armored scales, telepathic strategists with glowing eyes, creatures that moved like shadows, all of them were here to sharpen their skills. But among these powerful beings, Logan was the only human. To them, he was nothing more than a joke, a fragile creature from a weak species. Every day, he endured their laughter, their taunts, and their constant reminders that humans were not meant for war. He had no claws, no wings, no psychic abilities. Compared to the others, he was slow, weak, and utterly unremarkable. But Logan did not break. No matter how hard they mocked him, no matter how many times he lost in training, he kept pushing himself, training harder, refusing to give up. The Academy's training sessions were brutal. Every day, Logan was thrown into sparring matches against opponents who were faster, stronger, and more experienced. The reptilian warriors crushed him with brute force, the insectoid fighters overwhelmed him with sheer speed, and the telepathic beings read his every move before he even made it. He was tossed around like a rag doll, bruised and exhausted, but he always got back up. The instructors barely paid attention to him, convinced he had no future here. The students laughed, betting on how quickly he would fail. But Logan had something they didn't, a relentless spirit. He studied their movements, memorized their weaknesses, and learned to anticipate their attacks. He trained when the others rested, refining his skills in the darkness of the empty halls. He knew that if he wanted to prove himself, he had to be smarter, faster, and more unpredictable than anyone else. One day, the Academy announced a special training mission, a deep space exploration into an abandoned sector of the galaxy. The instructors explained that it was once a battlefield from a forgotten war, filled with ancient wreckage and lost technology. The students were to investigate, analyze, and report their findings. Logan saw this as an opportunity, a chance to prove himself outside of the sparring rings. When they arrived, the battlefield was a graveyard of shattered warships, floating debris, and forgotten relics of a time long past. The air inside the broken ships was stale, the silence unsettling. As the students spread out, Logan found himself drawn to a massive wreck on the outskirts, a ship unlike any he had ever seen. It was covered in strange markings, its hull scorched from battle, and its insides eerily silent. Something about it called to him, an unexplainable feeling deep in his bones. As he ventured deeper, he stumbled upon a chamber hidden beneath layers of collapsed metal. The room was filled with relics, ancient weapons, shattered armor, and strange consoles covered in dust. But at the center stood something extraordinary, a suit of armor unlike anything in the Academy. It was humanoid in shape, tall and imposing, with a design that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. The moment he touched it, the ship around him hummed to life, and an unfamiliar energy surged through him. The armor unlocked itself, wrapping around him as if it had been waiting for him all along. Suddenly, knowledge flooded his mind, battle strategies, combat techniques, and memories that did not belong to him. It was as if the armor itself carried the experiences of long-dead warriors. His muscles responded instantly, his movements sharper, faster, and more precise. He wasn't just wearing a suit, he had become something else entirely. Before he could fully process what was happening, alarms blared in his helmet. The other students had detected the energy surge and were heading his way. Logan turned to face them as they arrived, their expressions shifting from confusion to amusement. They still saw him as the weak human, the joke of the Academy. But that changed the moment he moved. The first alien warrior lunged at him, a reptilian brute with thick, armored skin. Logan reacted instantly, his new instincts guiding him. He sidestepped with inhuman speed, his hand moving faster than his mind, striking with precision. The brute crashed to the ground, stunned. The others hesitated, but then more attacked. Logan dodged effortlessly, countering their strikes with movements that felt entirely natural, as if he had been training for this his entire life. He took down opponent after opponent, leaving them gasping in shock. The same students who had laughed at him now stared in disbelief. But before he could revel in his newfound strength, a warning flashed across his visor. The ship's ancient systems had detected something an enemy long forgotten. Outside, the void of space began to stir. Dark ships emerged from the shadows, their sleek forms radiating an eerie presence. Logan didn't know who they were, but the armor did. The memories within it told him everything. These were the enemies it had been built to fight, the ones who had wiped out entire civilizations. And now, they had returned. The Academy's fleet scrambled to respond, but they were unprepared for this kind of battle. The alien students who had mocked him now looked to him in desperation. The armor had chosen him for a reason. It was humanity's lost legacy, a forgotten weapon of an ancient past. Logan clenched his fists as the suit powered up, the energy within it roaring to life. He was no longer just a student, no longer just the weak human in a sea of superior beings. He was a warrior of a forgotten age, and he was ready for war. Logan Carter stood in the cold, dark expanse of space, staring at the ruins of a battlefield long forgotten by the galaxy. The training mission had brought them here, a place filled with shattered warships, silent debris, and remnants of a war so ancient that no one remembered who had fought it. The Galactic Combat Academy had sent its best students to study the wreckage, to analyze what little remained and learn from the past. To the others, it was just another assignment, a chance to show off their skills. But to Logan, it felt different. The air inside the broken ships was heavy, thick with a strange presence, as if the ghosts of the past still lingered. He moved carefully through the wreckage, his breathing controlled, his eyes scanning the silent corridors of a ruined warship. The walls were scorched with old battle wounds, the metal rusted and broken. Strange symbols, unfamiliar yet oddly familiar, lined the walls, glowing faintly in the darkness. The ship had been abandoned for centuries, yet it felt as if something was still alive within it. Watching him, as he ventured deeper, he found himself separated from the rest of the students. The corridors twisted like a maze, leading him further into the ship's depths. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional sound of shifting debris. Logan's instincts told him to turn back, but something pushed him forward, a feeling deep in his bones that he was meant to be here. Then, he saw it, a massive chamber hidden beneath layers of collapsed metal, untouched by time. The room was filled with relics, old weapons fused into the walls, consoles covered in dust, and strange devices that no longer functioned. But at the center of it all stood something impossible, a suit of armor, unlike anything he had ever seen. It was tall and humanoid, sleek yet powerful, with an aura that made the air around it hum. Its design was ancient yet advanced beyond anything the Academy had ever taught him. The moment he stepped closer, the ground beneath him trembled. Lights flickered and a soft hum echoed through the chamber, as if the ship itself had recognized his presence. Hesitantly, Logan reached out and touched the armor. The moment his fingers brushed against it, a surge of energy rushed through him. The world around him blurred, and suddenly, he was no longer in the wreckage. His mind was flooded with images, battles fought in the stars, warriors clad in the same armor, wielding weapons that tore through enemy fleets like paper. He saw civilizations rise and fall, entire empires consumed by war. And then he saw the enemy. Dark figures, monstrous and unstoppable, creatures of nightmare that had nearly wiped out everything. The armor had been built to fight them, but its wearers had failed. The war had been lost, and history had been erased. Logan gasped as he snapped back to reality, his hands gripping the armor tightly. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized what he had just witnessed. This wasn't just a relic, it was a key to something much bigger. The galaxy had forgotten this war, but the enemy was still out there, waiting. And now, they knew he had found the armor. Suddenly, the ship groaned as if it were waking up. The floor vibrated, and old machinery whirred to life. A distant alarm blared, echoing through the dead halls. Logan turned sharply, his instincts screaming at him to move. He didn't know what he had triggered, but he knew he wasn't alone anymore. That moment, the other students arrived, drawn by the sudden energy spike. They entered the chamber, their expressions shifting from confusion to amusement. To them, Logan was still the weak human, the joke of the Academy. They saw the armor and laughed, calling it nothing more than an old piece of junk. But Logan knew better. The armor had spoken to him, shown him things no one else could see. Before he could explain, the ship trembled violently. The ancient systems had detected something, an incoming presence, something that had been waiting for centuries. The students stopped laughing. Their expressions changed to worry as their communication devices crackled with static. Then, the warnings came. Outside the wreckage, space itself seemed to shudder. From the darkness beyond, shapes emerged, sleek, silent ships, unlike anything in the Academy's database. They moved with eerie precision, their weapons already powering up. Logan's blood ran cold. He recognized them. They were the enemy from the visions. They had been waiting all this time, hidden in the void, and now they had returned. The Academy's instructors, stationed outside, scrambled to react, but they were too slow. The first blasts tore through their defenses with terrifying ease. The students panicked, their arrogance vanishing as they realized they were outmatched. Logan could feel the armor calling to him, urging him to act. He had no training in using it, but deep down, he knew it wasn't just a suit. It was a weapon, a legacy, and it had chosen him. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and let the armor wrap around him. The moment it locked into place, his body felt lighter, his movements sharper. The knowledge from the visions returned, guiding him. He activated the armor systems, and the heads-up display lit up with tactical information, enemy movements, and battle strategies. The other students stared in shock as Logan took control of the situation. The human they had mocked was now their only hope. Outside, the enemy ships closed in, their weapons charging for another strike. Logan clenched his fists as the armor's energy pulsed around him. The past had been forgotten, but he was here to remind the galaxy of what it had lost. The battle was about to begin, and for the first time, Logan knew exactly who he was meant to be. The cold darkness of space stretched endlessly as the silent remains of an ancient warship drifted through the void. It had been lost for centuries, buried in the forgotten history of the galaxy. No one knew who had built it, who had fought aboard it, or why it had been abandoned. To most, it was nothing more than wreckage, a lifeless ruin swallowed by time. But to Logan Carter, it was something else. As he stood in the dimly lit corridor of the ruined ship, he could feel something calling to him. The air was thick with dust, the walls scarred with the wounds of a war-long past. Faint blue lights flickered in the darkness, pulsing weakly as if the ship itself was breathing. The Galactic Combat Academy had sent its students on a training mission to study ancient battlegrounds, but Logan had wandered off, drawn to this place by an unexplainable force. His footsteps echoed as he moved deeper into the wreckage, his heart pounding with a strange sense of anticipation. Everything about the ship felt wrong, too quiet, too still, as if it was waiting for something. He passed broken consoles, shattered weapons, and long-dead machinery covered in frost. Then he found it. A massive door, different from the others, stood at the end of the corridor. Unlike the rest of the ship, this door was untouched by time, its surface smooth and unbroken. Strange symbols ran along its edges, glowing faintly as Logan approached. Without thinking, he reached out and placed his hand on the cold metal. The moment his fingers touched the surface, the entire ship trembled. Lights flared to life, old circuits sparked, and an eerie hum filled the air. The door groaned as it slid open, revealing a chamber beyond vast, ancient, and filled with something that made Logan's breath catch. At the center of the room, standing tall like a forgotten guardian, was a suit of armor. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek yet powerful, with intricate designs that pulsed with energy. It looked as if it had been waiting for someone, waiting for him. Logan stepped closer, his pulse racing. The armor was massive, built for war, and yet it felt strangely familiar, as if it belonged to him. As he reached out, his vision blurred. Suddenly, he was somewhere else. Memories, no, not his memories flashed through his mind. He saw warriors wearing the same armor, fighting against monstrous enemies that defied description. He felt the weight of battles fought long ago, the cries of those who had fallen, the echoes of a war that had been erased from history. And then He saw the truth: the enemy had never been defeated. They had only been waiting. Logan gasped as he snapped back to reality, his hands still hovering over the armor. His legs felt weak, but the knowledge remained. This was not just a suit, it was a weapon, a legend forgotten by time. And it had chosen him. Before he could fully process what was happening, an alarm blared through the ship. The other students had detected the energy surge. He turned to leave, but it was too late. A group of alien students from the academy rushed in, their eyes wide with shock as they saw the armor. They sneered, laughing at the idea of a human thinking he was worthy of such a thing. To them, he was still weak, still nothing compared to the superior races of the galaxy. But their laughter was short-lived. The ship trembled again, but this time, it was not because of the armor. Something else had woken up. Outside, the void of space twisted as dark shapes emerged, silent, sleek ships that moved with unnatural precision. Logan's blood ran cold. He recognized them from the visions. They were the enemy, the ones the armor had been built to fight. And they had come to finish what they had started centuries ago. The Academy's instructors, stationed outside, barely had time to react before the first blasts tore through their ships. Panic spread as the students realized they were trapped. Logan clenched his fists. He knew what he had to do. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and placed his hands on the armor. It responded instantly, unlocking and wrapping around him like it had been waiting for this moment. Energy surged through his body, filling him with strength, speed, and knowledge beyond anything he had ever known. The other students stared in disbelief. The human they had mocked was now standing before them, glowing with a power they could not understand. The enemy ships moved closer, their weapons charging for another strike. Logan could see the battle unfolding in his mind before it even began. He could feel the armor's power, the ancient strategies flowing through him. He had never fought in a real war, never commanded a fleet, but right now, none of that mattered. He was no longer just a student, no longer just a human. He was a warrior of a forgotten age, the last remnant of those who had stood against the darkness before. And this time, he would not let history repeat itself. The legend had awakened, and the battle was just beginning. The silent darkness of space stretched endlessly, broken only by the distant glow of dying stars. In the cold emptiness, an ancient warship drifted, forgotten by time. It was a relic of a war no one remembered, a battle erased from history. But something inside it was still alive. Deep within its ruined corridors, old machinery stirred, flickering back to life after centuries of silence. A signal pulsed through the void, weak but growing stronger, like a whisper waking from a long slumber. No one in the galaxy had noticed. No one had expected the past to return. But the signal had reached its destination, and something had begun to move in the darkness beyond the stars. On the other side of the galaxy, Logan Carter stood in the command center of the Galactic Combat Academy, staring at the holographic display before him. The Academy had been his home for years, a place where students from every race trained to become warriors. But today, something was different. A distress beacon had been detected in old frequency, one that should not have existed. The instructors dismissed it as a malfunction. But Logan knew better. He had seen things they refused to believe. He had felt the presence of something ancient. His fingers tightened into a fist. If the beacon was real, then the stories were true. The enemy that had been erased from history was still out there. And they were waking up. Without hesitation, Logan boarded a scout ship and set a course for the signal source. The other students mocked him, calling him reckless, claiming that humans were too weak to lead. He ignored them. He had heard the whispers in the wreckage, seen the visions hidden in the forgotten ruins. He knew something was coming. As his ship approached the dead warship, a sense of unease settled over him. The vessel was massive, its surface scarred by ancient battles. It floated in the void like a corpse, lifeless and cold. But as Logan's ship drew closer, something changed. The wreckage trembled. Lights flickered across its hull. And then the silence shattered. A piercing signal erupted from the warship, spreading through space like a shockwave. Logan barely had time to react before his ship's systems went haywire. The controls flickered, Alarms blared, and for a brief moment, he felt something watching him. And then, from the darkness beyond the warship, they appeared. Ships unlike anything in the Academy's database, sleek and deadly, moving with unnatural precision. Their hulls were black as the void, their weapons glowing with an eerie energy. Logan's breath caught in his throat. He had seen them before in visions, in the memories buried within the ancient wreckage. They were the enemy, the ones the galaxy had forgotten. And now, they had returned. The Academy's fleet scrambled to respond, but they were too slow. The enemy ships moved with terrifying speed, striking without warning. Explosions erupted in the void as the first wave of destruction tore through the Academy's defenses. Logan's ship spun out of control, the force of the blast sending him crashing into the warship's remains. His vision blurred, but he forced himself to move. He had to get inside. He had to find a way to fight back. Staggering through the wreckage, he reached the heart of the ship. And there, waiting for him, was the armor. The same ancient armor that had chosen him before. It stood in the darkness, untouched by time, its surface pulsing with a faint glow. Logan didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, letting the armor wrap around him. The moment it locked into place, his mind was flooded with knowledge battle strategies, enemy weaknesses, weapon systems that had been lost to history. The armor had been built for this war. And now, he was ready. The enemy ships descended upon the Academy, their weapons charging for the final strike. But before they could fire, Logan moved. His body felt lighter, faster. He launched himself from the wreckage, energy surging through his limbs. The enemy hesitated for the first time. They had not expected resistance. Not from a human. But Logan was no ordinary human. He was a warrior of a forgotten age, a fighter whose destiny had been written. Retreat, but it was too late. The forgotten legend had awakened, and the battle was no longer theirs to win. As the last enemy ship fell, the battlefield grew silent. Logan stood in the wreckage, his armor humming with power, his heart still racing. The enemy had returned, but they had been defeated. For now, he knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had forgotten them once, but it would not make the same mistake again. Logan turned his gaze to the stars, knowing that somewhere, in the far reaches of space, more of them were waiting. The war was not over. It had only just begun. The vastness of space was silent, but the tension that gripped the Galactic Combat Academy was deafening. Every cadet and officer aboard the station stared at the holographic display, their faces pale as they watched the unfolding disaster. The enemy, an ancient force that had been forgotten by time, had returned. Their dark, sleek warships moved like shadows, striking without mercy. The strongest fleets of the Academy were crumbling under their power, their defenses shattered like glass. For centuries, the galaxy had believed that humanity was weak, an insignificant species barely worth mentioning. The other races had ruled the stars, shaping history as they pleased. But today, everything was about to change. Deep within the Academy's hangars, Logan Carter stood before a massive set of armor, his heartbeat steady despite the chaos outside. This was no ordinary suit. It was a relic of war, a masterpiece forged in the darkest era of galactic history. It had chosen him, and now it called him again. He could hear the distant echoes of battles fought long ago, the voices of warriors who had once worn this very armor. They had fallen, but their legacy remained. And today, Logan would continue it. He stepped forward, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. In an instant, the armor responded. Plates shifted, locking into place around his body. Energy pulsed through him. Knowledge that had been lost for centuries flowed into him, tactics, strategies, movements so precise they felt like instinct. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a weapon, a force awakened to fight a war that had been waiting for him. Outside, the enemy ships had begun their final approach. The Academy's defenses were in ruins, and the alien fleets were preparing to deliver the killing blow. Panic spread among the remaining officers. They had no leader, no hope. Surrender seemed inevitable. But then, a single figure stepped onto the battlefield. Logan launched himself from the hangar, his armor glowing with a power that had not been seen in millennia. The enemy hesitated for the first time. They had faced many warriors, but none like this. He moved with impossible speed, weaving through the debris, dodging energy blasts as if he could see them before they were fired. His weapons roared to life, sending streaks of golden energy tearing through the enemy's ranks. Explosions lit up the void as their warships, once thought invincible, crumbled under his assault. The students of the academy, who had once mocked humanity, watched in stunned silence. They had always believed their own species to be superior. Humans were weak, unimportant, a race with no history worth remembering. But now they saw the truth. One human, just one, was standing alone against the greatest enemy the galaxy had ever known. And he was winning. The enemy ships tried to regroup, but Logan did not let them. He moved like a storm, his armor adapting to every attack, his strikes faster than their sensors could track. He was more than just a soldier now. He was a legend in the making. The tide of battle shifted. Inspired by what they were witnessing, the remaining forces of the Academy found their courage. They rallied behind him, launching a counterattack with renewed strength. The enemy, once confident in their victory, now found themselves outmatched. One by one, their ships fell. The battlefield, once filled with despair, now burned with the fire of humanity's rising power. And then, in one final, devastating strike, Logan unleashed the full energy of his armor. A beam of pure destruction tore through the enemy flagship, shattering it into nothingness. The remaining ships, realizing their leader had fallen, retreated into the darkness, vanishing like ghosts into the void. Silence followed. The Academy's officers and cadets stared at the wreckage, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. The battle was over. The enemy had been defeated. And at the center of it all, standing amidst the debris, was Logan Carter. The human they had once laughed at. The warrior they had underestimated. The legend they would never forget. As he turned back towards the station, his armor still glowing with the power of history itself, one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer weak.